Bonsoir à toutes et à tous, bienvenue. Cette conférence donc, fait partie du cycle d'événements qui accompagne l'exposition Les 42 livres d'artistes du prix Bob Kahl, dont Mela Dávila Freire fait partie en fait, du comité des experts et que nous avons le plaisir d'accueillir ce soir. Elle va nous présenter ce film réalisé par Ed Ruscha qui s'intitule The Books of Ed Ruscha. La qualité de ce film est assez mauvaise, vous aurez l'occasion de le voir. C'est en fait un film qui a été davantage tourné comme une expérimentation, pas du tout un film pour être diffusé, et surtout il a été filmé dans un format 16 mm. Et ce que nous allons voir ce soir, c'est sa digitalisation. Mela commencera en fait sa présentation en nous délivrant en fait des clés de lecture qui nous permettront de regarder le film. La projection qui suivra dure à peu près une trentaine de minutes et puis nous vous ferons circuler à l'issue de la projection le micro afin que vous puissiez ou commenter le film ou poser les questions. Donc comme Mela, qui parle de nombreuses langues, va faire sa présentation ce soir en anglais, de façon à ce qu'elle puisse vous comprendre, il faudrait que les questions, si vous le voulez bien, soient exclusivement faites en anglais. Et puis nous allons clôturer cette soirée avec une verrée, donc on pourra aussi finaliser la discussion à l'étage. Donc une verrée qui vous sera ensuite offerte. Et puis je profite de l'occasion que j'ai encore ce micro pour vous signaler que ce cycle d'événements se clôturera le 18 novembre avec une présentation de l'éditeur et artiste Bernard Villers, à qui nous avons donné une carte blanche pour nous parler à la fois de son travail d'artiste qui utilise comme pratique le livre et également son travail en fait d'éditeur. Voilà, je crois que je vais passer la parole à Mela et vous laisser en sa compagnie et en celle de Ed Ruscha. Voilà, une belle soirée à vous.
Bonsoir, thank you. Thank you very much for having me tonight and for being here. And well, I feel very honored to have been invited to introduce this film to you. I'm not going to talk for very long. I would like to just give you a little bit of context for this film because it is a little bit of a surprising film, and I hope it will be much better understood, or you can take it much better if you know a little bit what it's about. I'm very sorry that my French is not good enough to make this presentation in English, but I hope it works for you. I will try not to talk too fast, which is usually my mistake when I present things. So, first of all, I mean, the title you already know, The Books of Ed Ruscha. The film was done in 1969. As Natalia has just explained, it was never really presented at the time. I think many years later, when Ed Ruscha was already a very well-known artist, it was released by one of his galleries as a DVD in some sort of like small edition with signed copies. But it is basically a film that has not really circulated. Ed Ruscha is very well known for his painting, and he's also extremely well known for his books. But he was not so active in the field of film and filming, and so this is a little bit special that we can see the film here tonight. It has not been screened so often. But I wanted to talk, going back to the title and the date, I think I should start by talking a little bit about the 60s so as to give you a little bit of context, as I said. As you all know, I mean, there were many things happening in the 60s. Conceptual art was exploding and many other changes were taking place in the field of art. In the case of Ed Ruscha, he has made a career as a painter and is very much connected usually to the movement known as pop art, which you all know, and I should not go into depths with a description of pop art. I just want to underline the fact that one of the main traits of pop artists is that they suddenly turned to daily life for inspiration, and like common everyday life objects became subjects of art, of painting, and many other genres at the time. And this is also very, very strongly seen in the paintings of Ed Ruscha, and this is the context. This is mainly the creative context where he was working at the time when he did his books and when he did this film. So there was this attempt in the context of pop art to capture the interesting aspects of everyday life, or to capture ordinary things and give them or make them visible under a special light, but mostly uncommented. It was like I take this object, which is part of my daily life, and I present it to the public without apparent mediation, no? As it is. I take the object as it is and present it as an artwork. This is one of the things that were happening in the 60s. The other things important to this film are facts such as the expansion of what we know as artist genre. You know, we came from a whole history of art where the basic genre were painting and sculpture and drawing and printing at most. And then suddenly a lot of new formats started to appear, technique was changing, and there were also another possibility, other set of possibilities. So artists started like searching very actively for different supports for their work. And film, of course, and recording of the moving image was one of the important resources that they suddenly had at hand. It was still quite complicated to film as we do today, and this is one of the things that I wanted to underline, because Natalia told me there would be a lot of young people, or some of you would be like younger people, younger than us, and I think it will be interesting to see how you feel about this film, which was done at a time when it was really difficult to record, like in a domestic context or in a very spontaneous kind of portable way to record the moving image. This is something very strange to figure out today when we can all of the time record with our cell phones, but it was really very different at the time. In fact, Ed Ruscha, there are 3 known films of his. It's interesting to see how different fonts different sources tend to talk about like 2 or 3 at the most. And all of them were recorded in 16 millimeters, which was already not the latest technology at the time. In fact, the latest technology had been presented at the beginning of the 60s. I think it was 1964 when Sony, when the brand, the company Sony, started to sell for the first time a portable domestic video recorder, which was called Sony Portapac. Maybe the name sounds familiar, but it was the first time that somebody could go into a shop and buy themselves a video camera, which was completely new. And a lot of the explosion of video art has to do with the fact that then that it suddenly at the time became possible for artists to reach out and have this technology at hand. In the case of Ed Ruscha, he recorded with 16 millimeters camera. The quality of his films is, I mean, certainly not of a professional level, as you will see when we see the film, but it was not something that he was very worried about, I think. In this context, I wanted to mention 2 films that probably can sound as echoes when we watch together now. Ed Ruscha's film and films that you surely know. Andy Warhol, who's also one of the stars of the pop movement, was also making films at the time. And all of you probably have heard of 2 of his movies, Sleep, which was done in '64, and Empire State Building, which was done in '68, 1 year before the Ed Ruscha film was recorded. All of these, both these films are based on the same principle, which is a fixed take. The camera never moves. The film is never edited, and they are extremely long in length. I think Sleep is something like a little bit over 5 hours. The Empire State Building, I think it's over 8 hours of duration. And they were never edited after they were recorded. What we see when we see these films is what was actually recorded, and there's very little action in these films. In one of them, Sleep, what you see is a friend of Andy Warhol's sleeping in his bed for 5 hours. And in the Empire Building film, what we see is how the lights, how the daylight goes away, and then the building is illuminated by the lights, by the evening lights, and then at some point they start to be switched off because the day is starting again. It's like many hours of evening, night, and then dawn. So there's a different concept of what action means and what recording action means and what moving image is about. And I think we could talk for hours about the connotations of this, like filming the nothing or the very little action or the like only tiny little details and changes. But this is something that you will probably have to bear in mind. It will probably like ring a bell when we now watch together Ed Ruscha's film, which is a little bit, which was a little bit done along the same lines in some senses. And then also in this context, and this is obviously in the case of Ed Ruscha even more important, it was not only film that was kind of exploding, there were many other genres that were appearing, like performance or installation, etc. But in particular, the artist book as a support of like in full right in the field of art was being expanded at the time. Artists have been doing books for many centuries, I would say. But it was in the 60s when the book as a form or as a format or as a physical support became like really relevant for avant-garde artists for many different reasons. This would again be a very long, could lead to a very long talk or a very long discussion about the different reasons why books became important at the time. But there's one which is always underlined, basically also by the protagonists, which is the fact that books didn't need an art gallery to reach the public. This on the one hand, and then on the other hand, they could be mass-produced and multiplied, which involved like the spreading of an idea, of an artistic idea, in ways which would be inconceivable in terms of like classic genres, such as sculpture, painting, etc. So many artists turned to the bookmaking as one of the different ways in which they could bring their artistic practice into form, into material form. And Ed Ruscha was one of them. And he's, in fact, very well known for being one of the so-called founding fathers of the genre, together with, he's mostly mentioned together with Dieter Roth, with a German artist who was at the time also making a lot of books. The interesting thing about artist books to me is, I mean, there are obviously many aspects to it, but when I'm sometimes asked what I would underline or what is the most important trait to me and why I devote my research to artist publications, I think one of the main reasons why I do this is because I think they offer artists an amazing possibilities so as to subvert expectations. I mean, books are extremely conventional objects. I think there's hardly any human being, or in most places in the world, not only in the West, but also in the world at large, everybody knows how a book works. Maybe you cannot read, maybe you have no clue as to what the content means, but everybody knows that a book is open like this or like this, and that there's a sequence of pages that usually tell a story or like present some kind of content in a linear way. So this is what we as human beings know, and then artists come and work on that convention so as to present it under very many different lights, and this is always fascinating. And the moment one comes up with a new definition of what an artist book is, the next thing that happens is that an artist comes and jumps over the definition and does something which is not included in this definition. So it's kind of an ungraspable field, which is really exciting. And Ed Ruscha was like a key figure at the time in like giving this impulse to this format so as to become an artistic format. So a little bit of information about Ed Ruscha. He was born in 1936 in Nebraska, but then spent his youth in Oklahoma, in some kind of rural US setting, and then moved to Los Angeles to study art. And then made a lot of friends in the art circles, but also in the music, in the pop music circles, and in the film industry. And one of the interesting things about Ed Ruscha is that in his books, he very often relied on friends or collaborated with friends so as to develop the ideas. And he's, interestingly, one of the few artists that regularly credit these friends in his books, even though he's always kind of spoken about as the kind of individual, genial artist. The fact is that many of his books were collaboration projects, and he always kind of mentions the people who were involved. And one of the persons who did a lot of work with him in terms of publications was a musician called Mason Williams, who plays the main character in the film that we're going to see. I was just explaining, I mean, this is just an anecdote, but I was just explaining, Natalia and Eric, that when you see the hands of this person in the movie, you will see that he has very long fingernails. This is because he is actually, or was at the time, a guitar player. Later on he became a composer, but at the time he did a lot of interesting projects with Ed Ruscha, and also his own projects. Also very much in this line of kind of attempts to capture reality and bring it into the publications without much comment or without much intervention. One of the very nice publications that Mason Williams did at the time, which is also very little known, the same as this film, is called Bus. And it's a poster which shows one of these Greyhound buses in real size. So it's not really often exhibited because you need a really big wall to have it displayed. But also this work is something that I keep being reminded of when I see Ed Ruscha's film. Now, Ed Ruscha started making books as works of art very soon, and he was not really worried about signing them or making very limited editions. What he wanted was to spread them out so much as possible. So when the first edition was finished, a second one was immediately printed, and so on and so on. He worked mostly in the 60s and also a little bit in the 70s, and I think I would very much like to read the titles of some of his books, so that we all have an idea of what kind of projects he was developing with his publications. You will probably know most of them. 26 gasoline stations, various small fires, some Los Angeles apartments, every building on the Sunset Strip, 34 parking lots, Royal Road Test, business cards, 9 swimming pools and a broken glass, crackers, real estate opportunities, baby cakes, a few palm trees, records, and Dutch details. So mainly, if we didn't know anything about Ed Ruscha's books, when we hear these titles, what we would think of are some sort of inventories or listings of sorts. Books like, the titles like 34 parking lots or real estate opportunities kind of resound in our heads as some sort of collection of data which are brought together so as to present a list of things. And this is basically, as you probably know, what Ed Ruscha's books are. They never have any text or hardly have any text, and they are basically selections of images. There's never an explanation why these given images were chosen out of the myriad possibilities that you could have. If he says something like 9 swimming pools and a broken glass, we have no idea why those 9 and not 100 other possible ones. But there's there's a lot of intention of inventorying in all of these titles, which is then something that you can see also in the books. But it is also very much, as I was explaining at the beginning, within the frame of this pop art attempt to pick up something which is in principle insignificant or not particularly special and bring it into art. And in that sense, it connects very much with the principles of pop art. Interestingly, one of them that you probably know, the one entitled Royal Road Test, it is one of the funniest. There's a lot of humor also in many of Ruscha's books. This one in particular, in case you don't know the story, this is about a typing machine, a writing machine from the brand Royal, and this is why the title is Royal Road Test. And what Ed Ruscha does with his friend Mason Williams, again, the same guy who you're going to see right now, they take the machine into a car, they speed up, and then they throw it onto the pavement, and the typing machine is completely destroyed. And this is usually commented on as an example of banality, something an insignificant act which is more a joke than anything, and it is recorded through photographs. I think this is obviously one of the levels in which you can read it, but you can also read it in the context of somebody who was making books with no text. I think it is very much of a statement also, this act of taking a writing machine, a typing machine, and throwing it out of the window of a car, in terms of like the fact that it sheds a lot of light on what his books are about. This no comment, no explanation, no language, no language involved in what you see through the images is very much one of the traits that resonate all through his books, and I think you will remember it also when you see the movie. In terms of his films, and I'm almost finished with my presentation. In terms of his films, as I said, I mean, sources vary. This is not the most well-known part of his work, But I have found about 3 different films. 2 of them are fiction films, more or less. But this one is some sort of documentary. And I say some sort of documentary because it's not, as it happens with his books, it's not exactly the type of documentary that one could probably expect in a way. Again, the fact that his friends are involved is key, as it is in his editorial production. And I think this subverting expectation, this idea of subverting expectations, or in other words, being so faithful to the title that you present literally what the title says, which is most of the times not what the convention says it should be. I think this is also an idea that resonates very much within the film. But I think it's better if I stop now and we see the film, and then if you want, we can discuss it, or you can ask questions, or we can all comment on what your thoughts were when you were watching it. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy it.